Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Underserved, the podcast for the rest of the tech industry. I'm your host, Andrew Gelina. With me in studio today is Jesse McSweeney, Program Manager and Scrum Master at IQVIA. Jesse, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for having me.
So I understand you first to get into the industry weren't, say, your typical CS guy or someone banging out code on a Commodore VIC-20 at 10 years old.
I understand maybe three words that you just said. No, I was a political science major at Westfield State College, and I said college because when I was there, it was a college. Funny story, I went back to Westfield State maybe 5 or 6 years later to just see the campus, visit the bookstore or whatever, and all the Westfield State College paraphernalia and gear was 50% off. I felt kind of odd, but I said, you know what? I like a good deal like anyone else. I got the 50% off sweatshirt and all that stuff. So yeah, I'm a political science major. I like to say I majored in a hobby. You wouldn't be able to, I'm going to date myself here, open up the newspaper and say, oh, where are the political science jobs? But it was just something that I was drawn to. I grew up in a family that ran for political office, something that I enjoyed. I wish I probably took a couple of more business classes. But no, I never had any ambition of getting into the IT space when I graduated back in 99.
So you did end up working at the Massachusetts Division of Insurance. Now, folks have all heard about insurance investigators that look into disability cases or arson or stuff like that, but you were the opposite, looking at what's going on with the agents, right?
Yeah, because the natural progression from graduating with a political science degree is to go work for a state regulatory agency in insurance, because there's a good segue from one to the other. But yeah, 23-year-old kid, I got a job working for the state. My thought was, you know what, the checks are going to clear every other week. They're not going to go out of business. Let's see what this has to offer. And it was one of the most eye-opening experiences, even to this day. Andrew, you're absolutely correct. When people think of insurance fraud, they're thinking of people faking accidents, falling down and claiming workers' comp and so on and so forth. That wasn't where I was. I was in the space of investigating your insurance agent, your insurance company stealing your money. And that's a real thing. I spend my fair amount of time in dingy basements of insurance agencies in some tough parts of town. I'm glad I always had a partner with me because some of the stories were just, you wouldn't believe them if it was just me telling you. I remember one story. One time we had to go out to Springfield and I won't give names or anything like that, to protect the quote unquote innocent. We had to go out and talk to an insurance agent in Springfield. One of the things that caught me a little bit off guard was we both went to the same school, Westfield State grad. And this was right around the time when there was the anthrax scare. Everyone was concerned when something weird came in the mail. People were protecting themselves. And I don't know if a lot of people know this, probably no one knows this except for me, is that insurance agents, part of their licensing process, they have to pay a lead paint surcharge. Exactly. That's the look. Now, people that you can't tell, Andrew just made it look like someone did something really bad to him. Lead paint surcharge is exactly what you think, what you hear. It helps mitigate and remediate lead paint issues that have come from kids getting lead paint poisoning. How they tag that onto insurance agents, I have no idea, but they do. This insurance agent didn't like the fact that he had to pay this surcharge. So when it came time to renew his license, he sent in monopoly money, which is red flag number 1, and then 2 tea bags, red flag number 2. And it took me a while, like, what does he mean? What's the tea bags? I was like, I wonder if he means like the tea party, like he's really like protesting this. So we had to go out and talk to him because, again, this is around the anthrax time. People are a little concerned with sending weird things in the mail. So we go out and start talking to him. And sure enough, he sent it to protest this tax. And we got into this grand discussion of his right to free speech. And it really kind of got weird. And I remember saying, well, sir, you're right. You have the right to free speech and so on and so forth, but you don't have the right to yell fire in a crowded theater. And my constitutional law professor back at Westfield State would be very proud of me for saying that, because you don't. You don't. At that point, this individual stood up, which I had to sit back a little bit, my partner and I. He then started to sing America the Beautiful at the top of his lung, to the point where everyone in his office turned around and looked at him like, what the hell is going on here? I've never seen anything like it. He was dead on to what he believed in. It didn't matter what this 23-year-old kid was trying to tell him. So we kind of hustled ourselves out of the office.
Is the tax gigantic? Is it
No, it's
hundreds
like
of dollars?
$5 or something. Probably spent more in gas to get out there, but he just didn't think he had to pay it. And you know what? I tend to agree, but there are a lot of things that I have to do that I don't agree with.
I heard a saying once, you always lose money on principle.
Exactly. Yes, you can stamp your feet all day, but you know what? The state holds that final card and they can say, enjoy not having your license and we'll see you next year.
So that was an unusual outlier. The problem that we talked about on the phone was, and I wasn't aware this was so common, agents taking money from a business to supposedly bind an insurance policy, like general liability or E&O or liquor liability as a big one, and then not actually binding the policy and just pocketing the money.
Yeah, that I wouldn't say it's common, but that was some of the things that we dealt with. Quick example, I pay for my policy. I give Joe, my insurance agent, a check made out to him as the agent. They're supposed to then turn around and then turn that check over to the company. Company gives me a declaration page with the policy and says I'm insured for the following year for these limits on this type of coverage. One particular case that sticks in my mind is there was an agent who was forging these certificates. So he would take the money, put it into his bank account, go down to Foxwoods, and I would have his bank information. He would be down in Uncasville, Connecticut. There's not much going on down in Uncasville, Connecticut, except for 2 casinos. Based on his withdrawals, he was a terrible gambler. He was stealing money from people who were placing liquor liability policies. All your bars have liquor liability in case, God forbid, someone DUI, something like that, they need to be covered. This case in particular involved a couple of bars in Boston owned by these 2 brothers. They owned a couple of bars in the city. And this guy was taking their money. And they didn't become aware of it until they called the company to ask them a question about a renewal date or something like that. And they said, we have no idea who you are. We have no idea what you're talking about. Let us look into it. They called us and we started to look into it too. But the 2 brothers wanted to have their own kind of investigation. So without telling their agent, quote unquote, what they knew that this was a whole sham that he was pulling, they asked him to come over to their bar so they could talk about renewing and doing all this. And this is the agent, the individual who stole the money, is telling me this story. So I'm pretty confident he was telling me the truth. He goes in and they're talking to him and they finally break the news. We know you took our money and you didn't give us a policy. Just get us our money right. We'll all walk away. It's at my house. I got to go down to my house. And he says, okay, we'll give you a ride. Our car's parked out in the back alley. Let's go. Agent says to us, as getting a little leery because these guys aren't the most fine, upstanding citizens, but I got to go. There are 2 of them, 1 of me, and what it is. I get in one side of the car in the back seat. One of the brothers gets in the front seat and starts to get ready to drive, but the other brother gets with me in the back seat. He gets out on the other side of the car and starts running up the alley. The agent then says that as he was running up the alley, one of the brothers pulls out a gun and starts shooting at him.
I don't doubt it.
Not the best of shots because he missed him, but it made me think twice about going to sit downstairs in office bars down in the basement.
Wow. So the guy lived, but I presume he got in trouble.
Yeah, that was one of the times I was called to testify in front of the grand jury. I forget how much time he did, but he did end up serving some time in the Norfolk House of Correction.
So I guess to combat that, doesn't matter if you get a receipt, doesn't matter if you have a canceled check, you really got to call the actual insurance company and maybe ask them an innocuous question like, what's my policy number?
Exactly. Especially if you're in high value policies, your liquor liability, as you said, Andrew, your E&O. But even for the family that has their homeowners or car, call the company, just check in if you have any questions or concerns. And one thing I would say, and this is probably less than likely than it was when I was doing this 15, 20 years ago, do not pay in cash. Cash is not king when it comes to these types of transactions. Credit card, check, things like that you can put a hold on if something does go wrong.
And that's traceable and provable.
Exactly, yeah. Be leery about spending cash on things like that.
All right. So after a few years of chasing down these rapscallions, you ended up getting into the financial industry and then particularly into the insurance industry at HomeSite.
Yeah. I spent a little time at One Beacon in their financial auditing unit and a couple of years there, and then made my way back into insurance, which started to be a theme for me with HomeSite Insurance in Boston. I found myself all of a sudden in the IT space, though. And someone thought I could be a project manager within an IT organization at an insurance company. How I made it into that space, I still am curious, but I'm not curious enough to question it and say, why am I here? I just nod my head and say, yep, people think I'm doing a good job, and it feels like I am. I started working as a project manager for HomeSite, spent 7.5, 8 years there, learned a couple of really valuable lessons there, things that I take today. One of them, and this is kind of the big lessons that I practice and I preach at the same time, is when communicating out, one of the things that I really try to work on is communication, both written as well as verbally. Know your audience. Know the email that you're sending out is going to all of those people on that to line. Are they all going to understand exactly what you're saying? Or do you need to kind of limit that and then speak to people individually? I wish I had known that before I sent an email to roughly 50 to 100 people, somewhere in that ballpark, back on December 30th, around 2013, 2014. All good emails come out the last day before the end of the year, right? And I remember our CIO was livid. I had sent out a status email and I really didn't think it through. And I put my foot in my mouth, and it started me to think and really kind of get an idea of know your audience. Really pay attention to who you're speaking to, what you're saying, and be clear with what you're saying, because emails are one-sided conversations. So that was one of the lessons I learned. Also, while at HomeSite, I was asked to start to look into this process workflow methodology called Scrum. For the tech people out there, you know what I'm talking about. It's a workflow where you concentrate on getting the first 10% of a project done. Make sure it's done before you move on to anything else. You don't do the typical waterfall approach. And when I say that, I always think back, because that's my wife's maiden name, where it's do all your analysis, throw that over the fence and do all your development, throw that all over the fence and do your testing. But the example I always give is what happens if when you get in testing, you've realized you made a mistake 12 weeks ago, and now you've got to go back. You've then wasted how much time? The beauty of a Scrum process is spend a couple of weeks, build up a small piece of what your deliverable is. Make sure it works. Make sure your customers are on board with it. Put that aside and then move on to the next piece. The auto industry does it. The software industry has been doing it for years. I think it's something you could do pretty much regardless of the industry. So I started looking into this. While I was with HomeSite, I was the second person at the company to receive my certification. On that following Monday, told we can't send everybody to training because it costs more than we want to spend to send everybody. So guess what? You can train everybody now. So that's when I started getting into training up people, building teams, and I really enjoyed that. I found it to be one of the passions of what I like to do. I had coached youth sports while I was in high school. I really enjoyed coaching. I enjoy coaching people. I like watching people succeed. It's one of those things that coaches are very important pieces in a puzzle. They don't necessarily always have to be the best at what they do. So in my spare time, one of my passions is golfing. These professional golfers are the 1% of the 1% of the 1% at the top of their sport. Why do they need coaches? They're clearly better than their coach, but their coach has a way to get the most out of them. And that's what I like to do. I like to work with people, build teams up, find what makes them click, put them together, and then watch them succeed. And it's one of those things where in a Scrum atmosphere, I get a really good charge when I see this happen. And the interesting part about being a Scrum master is all of a sudden you see teams succeed. And that's how you know you're doing a good job. I remember one time, one of my first bosses I had while I was at HomeSite, he was the one that asked me to start training people. His name, Tim Delphos, great guy. He asked me one day, he said, Jesse, how do you know if you've done a good job as a Scrum master? The answer is you don't have a job, because the goal of being a Scrum master is you have built this self-organizing team and you can just fade into the background. You don't need to be there to hold their hand anymore. They can do all of these things themselves.
You kind of built a system.
Exactly. You build a system, you build the machine, you get it to that high level of efficiency, and the machine runs smoothly, and you just sit back. I still have a job, so I still have some work to do, but that's where I was introduced to Scrum, which is interesting, leading projects, not being a tech guy.
Is that challenging at all, working with the developers? Do they have the, if you weren't a player, you can't be a coach type thing?
Yeah. I'm not even going to say I know enough to be dangerous, because I don't even know enough to know enough. It's a definite challenge. There are times that I wish I had a little bit more understanding so I could kind of speak the language, quote unquote. But I think it also has an advantage because I have worked with Scrum Masters in the past who were developers. They try to get involved in the development work, and that's not the role that we play. You've got to take a step back and let the team do their thing. So I am someone who wants to get involved, but a man has to know his limitations. I know I have no space down there to talk about C# and Java, so I don't. I think it's helped me to not want to be in that space, to be at a spot where I can just concentrate on the process and really work to fine-tune my team's output.
Did you sneak in a Clint Eastwood quote there?
I did. I did. I'm glad you noticed.
Big fan of spaghetti westerns myself.
Okay. Yeah.
So I guess the other advantage to not being down in the technical details is it's probably easier to cross domains.
Yeah. I don't want to say I specialize in building widgets. I can take that Scrum process, that agile mindset, and go from industry to industry to industry, and the process doesn't change. I, 4 years ago, left the insurance industry. I made that transition from one industry to another, and I'm now in the healthcare industry, but still in an IT space, still practicing Scrum, but it's a different industry. So I can make that transition, which is good because it doesn't silo me in. I can go from one industry to another industry, different flavor here and there, but at the end of the day, the mindset, the workflow is still the same process.
Let me rewind back to something you said earlier, talking about your December 30th story. Let's say I'm a developer and I have found that there's some sort of issue that is going to cause a date to change, or something's going to slip, or there was an issue in production, and I need to communicate this to executives who may not have the same technical depth that I do, may not inherently understand the problem as much as I do. How do you do that? What advice would you give a developer who's in that position, or the younger you on December 30th?
The younger me on December 30th, I would have sat down with my management team and gone through what that strategy should look like, because we were delivering news that wasn't going to lighten anyone's New Year's Eve. There was some resource questions or things like that. But I think you've got to make sure everyone is on the same page. I have to be able to, as the then project manager, be able to explain, because that is part of my job. I need to be able to explain what's going on. And people are going to want to know from a technical perspective as well. And if you're going to talk to a CIO, they're going to want to know the technical side of this. So the younger me needed to understand the technical aspect to this enough that I could have a conversation. No one was going to expect me to get into the weeds, but be able to speak to the content behind the context, be able to articulate what the problem is, what the mitigation plan is, and when we're going to be out of this problem. I think I needed to not rush to send that email out, the younger me. Another thing I would say, take a breath. The world's not going to stop spinning. The sun's going to come up tomorrow. Take a breath. Write an email. Don't hit send. Have someone take a look at it. Does it answer those questions of what is the problem? How are we going to solve it? When is it going to be solved? If it does, then you can send it. But make sure everyone's on the same page. I'll kind of come back to that. You've got to have consensus so that we all have the same goal in mind.
To find my next job, first, I want to hear about dozens of jobs I am overqualified for.
Someday, I will talk to a recruiter who knows the difference between Java and JavaScript. That will be the one.
Would I mind commuting 3 hours each way each day? Of course not.
All I have to do is go through 5 separate interviews, complete a 10-hour coding exercise, and recite the national anthem backwards? I'm in.
Finding your next consulting gig should not be this difficult. Quite frankly, you deserve better. Syrinx is the consulting company founded and run by software consultants. We get you. Find out why our employees are some of the happiest and best paid consultants in the industry at syrinx.com. That's SYRINX.com. Find a better way today. Syrinx Consulting is a proud sponsor of Underserved, the podcast for the rest of the tech industry. I think especially with bad news or changes to schedule or something, the more you can communicate up before you even send that email, maybe with a call, maybe get everyone on a bridge. People hate surprises.
Yeah, they hate surprises. They really, really hate surprises. When you were a little kid and someone yelled surprise, your initial thought was, whoa, I'm scared. What the hell is going on here? Then you kind of liked it. But no one likes surprises. I wish my younger self knew you, Andrew, at that point. Yes, communicate up.
And I'm a big fan of get everyone on the bridge. Guys, get on this conference bridge. Let's talk through it. People need to have tantrums, fine. If people need to do whatever, fine. If we need to spitball and try and come up with some solutions together, fine. And the email's more of a recap.
Yeah, the synopsis of those sessions and say, as we discussed earlier, comma, I like that opening to emails. It gets everybody back on the same page and we can move forward.
I definitely recommend, though, making sure you actually send that email. It's not enough to talk about it on the bridge. Send the recap email, even if everyone is in total agreement, just so it's in writing, just so it's memorialized, and just so everyone has some plan to move forward.
Exactly.
So fast forward to now, you're currently at IQVIA. What are you doing for them?
Yeah, so I have been with IQVIA since last November. It's kind of a strange time we're in right now. I've actually been working from home more than I've been in the office. I've been out of the office since March 16th. As I said earlier, we are a company in the healthcare field. We are a publicly traded company existing in over 100 countries, a little north of about 58,000 employees. IQVIA is a provider of biopharmaceutical development and outsourcing services, primarily focused on clinical trials, phases 1 through 4 of clinical trials. Where we are pandemic-wise, everyone hears about clinical trials and the importance of them based on kind of the pandemic that is out there. Yes, and so we do have some of our clinical trials out there working on a vaccine for the COVID virus that is out there. So it is some interesting work we are doing. I am very proud of the work we're doing. The application that we build and provide allows drug manufacturers to track those trials, to get information to the 100 plus countries that we operate in, the 58,000 plus employees that we have. These are very important trials that are going on. These are very important people that are working within these trials. And this application that we built and provide is allowing for information to be disseminated back and forth. I am still in the IT space. I feel I'll probably be in that space for however long I want to be. I enjoy working with the team I have now. And the work that I am doing is not only within the Scrum space, but it's also on the program manager side. So I'm getting some good experience within that forward strategic planning space as well. I'm glad I've been able to maintain that Scrum Master hat, though, because it has allowed me to continue to build teams. I'm starting to work with offshore teams, and their understanding of Scrum is just a tick different, not much, but I'm enjoying it. I'm working, building, and watching teams succeed. There's been some growing pains, but it's one of those things that I enjoy successes. But I also, and this is kind of strange, I enjoy the failures too, because I'm someone that looks back at a failure and says, okay, what can we learn from that? The success is rinse and repeat. Not to downplay a success, but you learn more from a failure. Not that I want to go fail every time out. I'm happy to succeed more than I fail.
You want a good batting average.
Yeah, I'd like to be around 750, 800, somewhere in there. I'd like to blow that 406 mark away for you baseball addicts. But you learn more from your failures. And that's something that I stress on a daily basis, that I'm glad we're succeeding. I'm glad this is all working out. We're hitting our dates. We're hitting our numbers. But if we fail, it's not the end of the world. Again, the Earth's not going to stop spinning. The sun's still going to come up tomorrow. But we're going to learn.
So IQVIA makes this app, but it's not like they just put it on the App Store. They actually use it as part of a service offering to help run these trials?
Yep. It's a SaaS product. So we offer the product, we service them. So we do the soup to nuts, the whole thing. Some of our clients, and I won't name names because I'm here on my own. I'm not here representing anybody. But the large drug manufacturers that you hear of every day, just watch the 6 o'clock news, and all of these drugs to cure this and cure that, those are some of our clients.
So I believe that you dusted off that PoliSci major a while back.
I was a glutton for punishment in my early 20s, I think 23. I had the strange idea to run for the board of selectmen in the town I grew up in, the town of Hanson. As I said, my family's always been in politics as long as I can remember. My grandfather, aunts, uncles, parents, My mother was on the Board of Selectmen in the town of Hanson, and she was retiring. She had had enough. She had done some work on the school committee and on the Board of Selectmen. So she had said, that's it, I'm done, calling it over, no mas. So I said, you know what? I think I'm going to run for that seat. And so I did. I ran for that seat, 23 years old, and I won. Some people will say I ran unopposed. That's why I won. As soon as I voted for myself, I was good to go. But that was a very eye-opening, interesting experience. 23 years old, sitting on a Board of Selectmen, working with other people who have been on boards and have all this experience. And here I am with just my PoliSci degree. And I'm going to tell you right now, out of however many classes I took for that, none of them prepared me for this. None of them. I remember people would complain to me that how dare I try to set salaries and how dare I try to set budgets when I don't even pay taxes. So only people who pay taxes should hold public office? What about people who rent? The person who said that to me really didn't have much of a response. But it was one of those things where at that point I started to really look and value services the town offers. Everything from its infrastructure, public schools, to which I didn't have an appreciation of what went into making a public school system run until I got into that Board of Selectmen mentality. And it was one of those things where I'm publicly educated, kindergarten all the way through my college degree. And I remember talking with someone and they were concerned the budget for the school was too much. And I remember saying to this person, and I've said this multiple times, and I truly believe this, you either build schools or you build jails. Pick one. With that being said, that's the mindset I have is we have a duty to educate and we do what we can. So I sat on the Board of Selectmen in the town of Hanson for 5+ years until I resigned because I moved out of town and they had a weird rule. You have to live in town to hold a seat in town. One of those years I was chairman. I think I was 24 years old at that time. Chairman, 24 years old. I think when I was elected when I was 23, I was the youngest person to ever be elected to the Board of Selectmen in the history of the town. So I put my degree to work. My fiance at the time, we moved to Quincy, got married, bought a house down in Rockland, one town over from where I grew up. And I decided to get back into public service because, again, a glutton for punishment. This time I was appointed to the finance committee in the town of Rockland. And in that position, all you do is try to figure out how you're going to pay for these things. And that was a really tough position to be because times were good, times were better than they are now, but there's still not a lot of money out there, and there wasn't then. But we had to decide, are we going to pay for this or pay for that? And you've got to be able to justify it. So it helped me to work on consensus building because that's what that is. Politics is consensus building. So that was some really good experience. I met some really good people in the town of Rockland, and I valued that time that we were there. Now, fast forward to 2018, October of 2018. My wife and I sold our house in Rockland and moved to Norwell. And I did it again. Third time's a charm. This time I was appointed to...
You think you'd learn.
What's the definition of insanity? Nope. So I said, let's do it again because I hadn't had my fill. So I was appointed to the advisory board in the town of Norwell. The advisory board is a quasi-finance committee. We review all articles on the town meeting warrant, discuss the financial impact, so on and so forth. So I've been on that now for starting my second year. We had our first meeting of the new fiscal year last night. I was elected to be vice chairman. So I've got that going for me, which is nice.
I have some friends and relatives that have been involved in town politics in various towns in southeastern Massachusetts. And I watched the election process and helped them with a website here and there and watched what happened once they became a selectman or town finance committee.
You watch the life drain out of them.
It seems like no good deed goes unpunished.
It's unfortunately one of those thankless things that people do. And our public servants are people at that level who don't get paid for this. It is truly a volunteer position. They take time away from their families, from things they enjoy doing to better the community that you live in. So you know what? You can question and you can raise some really good points and you can have conversations, but don't complain. Don't get in their face. They're doing something that you didn't want to do. Someone's got to do it. Someone has to get up there and lead this town. You didn't want to do it. They did. They'll have conversations with you. They'll have spirited conversations. But don't make it personal. Don't get in their face because they're just volunteers.
It's such a tough position. Like you were mentioning budgeting. What if you've got 500 grand? It's needed by the senior center and the police and the school. Only one of them's going to get it. You're guaranteed someone's going to hate you.
Yeah, even the people that you give the money to are going to come back and say, why didn't you give us more? It's, again, you're not going to win a lot of popularity contests, but you just hope that you do right by as many people and by yourself as possible.
Well, to get away from it all, I know you like to go on some vacations as far away from Norwell as you can.
My wife and I, we don't have kids, so we're in kind of that spot where we can say, you know what, let's do this. Let's go to this place. And a little over a year ago, it was October, just the beginning of this month, my wife and I celebrated our 10-year anniversary last year, so September of 19. We had initially started talking about, well, let's go to Paris. We hadn't been to Paris. It's beautiful. We want to do this. We want to see that. And the more we started talking about it, we're like, we're going to be going here, going there. It's not going to be a relaxing experience. And so we said, well, what could we do instead? And we said, well, we don't want to go to Paris. Let's go to French Polynesia. I didn't really give much thought. My wife threw that out there. I was like, okay, whatever. And she said, I want to go to Bora Bora. My first thought was, that's a real place? I think there's a Vin Diesel movie where he's talking about going to Bora Bora. Yes, I enjoy watching the Vin Diesel movie here and there.
No shame.
Yeah, Bora Bora. It is that place where when your computer is running through its screensavers and they show that hut on top of the water, that's Bora Bora. And so that's what we did. We did that bucket list trip, and it was 16 hours away on a plane, 8 hours past. We flew to San Francisco, then 8 hours southwest of San Francisco on your way to Australia. It is in the middle of nowhere. I've never felt so isolated in my life, but I loved it. It was one of those trips, we always look back on it and say, we're glad we were able to do that before where we are now, as far as travel restrictions and this and that. Maybe something about being on an isolated island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean has some advantages right now, but getting there could be interesting. One of the things I found very strange, the story leading up to it, my wife and I, neither of us eat seafood. So yes, we are the two people in New England, in Massachusetts, that don't eat seafood.
No chowder?
No chowder. No coffee either.
No cod?
But we don't drink coffee and we don't eat seafood. It's quite a combo to find two people like that.
So no Dunks and no Captain Martins.
Yep, exactly. So we travel to this island in the middle of the ocean, middle of nowhere, and we don't eat seafood. So they have to bring everything into this island because this island is probably as big as your parking lot here. You can stand on one side and I could probably hit a 6-iron to get to the other side if I catch it good. And everything has to be brought in. So everything, couple of bucks here and there. It's not cheap. Every menu you opened up of the 3 restaurants on the island, they always had this kind of, not warning, but just this blurb. We apologize for our prices in advance. We're geographically challenged. So that's what you see before you even start to look at anything. Like, I've never seen that on a menu. I'm glad I'm sitting down. Everything was spectacular. Everything was fantastic. I'm so glad we went. Would I go back? I probably would, because it's that kind of a magical place. But it was quite the trip, as far away as I've ever been from here. Speaking of travel, my wife and I last week, and kind of the exact opposite, went up to New Hampshire to do the foliage thing. Went the opposite side of the spectrum from Bora Bora. We went to Mount Washington, or we went up as high at Mount Washington as you could that day because they had an ice storm and snowstorm the day before.
Well, the top of Mount Washington, I think they hold the record for highest wind speed ever recorded on Earth.
Yeah, our tour driver who drove us up to the top said it has the most unpredictable weather in the world. And he explained it's something like the weather up there can change quicker there than any other place in the world. More than Mount Everest, more than K2, more than wherever. But yeah, we were up there and it was last Friday, whatever that date was, the 9th, if I do my math quick. It was 26 degrees, sustained winds of 50, topping out, I think they said at about 70. And so the wind chill is about 10 degrees. 26 degrees up there feels colder than at 26 degrees down here. The wind up there, and I'm not a small guy, and I know people can't tell it, but I'm not a small guy. That wind moves you. It is, and I'll drop another golfer, it is a 2-club wind up there.
At least.
Yeah.
Blowing 50, gusting 70 will move anyone. So, folks, thank you very much for listening. We hope you've enjoyed this episode, part of Season 3 of Underserved. And as a reminder, all of our previous episodes are available on our website, underserved.fm. If you have anything to say about an episode, want to comment, want to have suggestions for future topics or guests, or are interested in being a guest yourself, the email address to use is underserved@syrinx.com. That's underserved@syrinx.com. So Jesse, thank you very much for making it out today to speak with me. We really enjoyed having you here.
Andrew, thank you. This is the first podcast I've done, and I've had a really great time. I've enjoyed it immensely.
Excellent. And we'll talk to you all soon on the next episode of Underserved.